Hey y'all, today I want to talk about an idea that kind of stems from something I thought about last video. I remember talking about the cost of living versus the cost of not living, kind of trying to be, tongue in cheek, a little coy. And maybe kind of think about the cost of living in terms of cities versus suburbs. As someone who grew up in the suburbs, obviously, I had a great childhood. Um, I lived in a nice neighborhood. I went to a nice school. There was not a lot of violence around me. And, overall, I'm not saying I'm complaining about it. But I want to kind of put this in perspective because people talk about, big cities and living in metropolitan areas being very expensive. Um, in terms of, rent, in terms of food prices, in terms of clothes, goods, like everything, gas. And they're 100% right. There's no disputing that living in a city or living in a metropolitan area, living in a walkable community is definitely more expensive. But I want to extrapolate that conversation and kind of make it a little bigger, um, and not think of just financial cost. So obviously, cost of living in a big city financially is more expensive. But I think people don't think about other aspects of cost, in terms of their life. For example, your health. And there's going to be people who say, rates of asthma are higher in cities because of higher rates of pollution. Maybe in the city that you live in, or the city that you're familiar with, maybe the sewage system isn't as good. Maybe the tap water isn't as safe, and that's all true. But in general, when you're living in a walkable area, when you're living in a city, you tend to walk around more, because using your car is cumbersome. Using your car is often unnecessary, especially if there's good public transport in the area you're in. And so, rates of obesity and rates of, cardiovascular disease, your overall cardiovascular health and potentially, the amount of fat on your body will be a lot lower, if you are walking to work, if you are walking to, meet up with friends, if you're walking to local coffee shops, like stuff like that, you will be getting more exercise. It's an inherent, byproduct of living in a city or living in a walkable metropolitan area. Another aspect people don't think about is happiness. But I'll break down happiness more into how social you are, or how many friends you are. And I kind of see this problem growing as people get older, and I kind of see it even in friends I know today. Obviously, people have their responsibilities, especially with working a 9 to 5, or even longer in a lot of cases. People are starting to get married. People are going to have kids, and as a byproduct, people get less social as they age. There's actually an epidemic, like a loneliness epidemic. People describe it often as the male loneliness epidemic, but it's also, a loneliness epidemic in general, because as technology gets more prevalent, as we spend more time indoors on screens, on our phones, on TVs, we don't socialize as much, and that has an impact on our mental health, whether we like to believe it or not. And I think a big reason why is that people are far away from each other, and the opportunity cost is often too high, especially on weekdays, to want to socialize. So what do I mean by this? For example, let's say you live in a suburb where, your friends might be, maybe they're close by, but to, do something that's fun, to go to a nice restaurant, to go to a comedy show, to go to any type of event, really. You might have to drive, 20, 30 minutes, maybe in some cases with traffic, 40, 45 minutes, whatever the case may be, to go to that event or do that activity on a weekday. And for the most part, most people have limited hours to work with on weekdays. You want to go to work, obviously. You want to get groceries, you want to be able to cook. If you're into the gym or anything, anything physical related, you want to participate in that, running, rock climbing, whatever it is. And so people don't have as much time. So for people who have to, take, 30, 40 minutes, let's say, to, go to an event, find parking, do all this jazz just to hang out with their friends on the weekday, it makes it a lot harder. And for a lot of people, it makes it not worth it, especially if they're trying to sleep early or they have other responsibilities. Whereas when you live in a city, you're constantly surrounded by things to do. On your way to work, you might pass a bunch of coffee shops, movie theaters, comedy clubs. On the way back from work, you might pass bars, you might pass, restaurants, whatever. And so it's probably easier for most people to go to those things, attend those events, spend time with friends, spend time by themselves, doing things outdoors, doing things outside of their homes on weekdays, just because it's more convenient. And people will end up doing things that are convenient at the end of the day. There's a reason why Apple is the biggest company in the world, the biggest tech company in the world. And it's not because their products are so revolutionary. I mean, their products are revolutionary, but it's not because their products are so much better than any other device brand that you can buy, based on the specs alone. Androids oftentimes have better processors, they have better, like RAM, whatever, pixel count, what, you get what I'm saying. Apple is popular because of the convenience of the operating system. It's so easy to use. Apple is popular because all the devices that you can get in the Apple ecosystem work well together. You have AirDrop, you have FaceTime, everything works well together, and that's the reason why people gravitate towards Apple. When you take out your AirPods, they automatically connect to your phone. When you turn on your laptop, you can automatically pair your phone's Wi-Fi if you're trying to use a hotspot. It's built in, So in the same way, social life is also built on convenience. How convenient is it for you to hang out with other people? How convenient is it for you to, go to events, do things on the weekdays that are outside of your norm of just, watching TV or cooking at home, reading a book, whatever. How convenient is it for you? Because convenience dictates your lifestyle at the end of the day, especially when people are as busy as they are now. Another aspect of living in cities that I think people miss out on is the exposure to newer culture, newer ideas, newer technology. Just walking around Atlanta, you'll see a lot of things that you won't see in the suburbs, like in Alpharetta or in Lawrenceville, for example. You'll see DoorDash delivery robots, delivering people food. They kind of look like Wall-E, like in a sense, and they have like different names and stuff. Like some of them have Indian names, some have Asian names, black names. It's actually kind of funny. But you'll see things like that. Waymos are now a thing in Atlanta. If y'all don't know, Waymos are essentially driverless cars. And right now they're used for Uber primarily. But I could see them being used for food delivery in the future. I could see them, expanding to different roles, maybe it gets even cheaper to the point where people kind of opt for, taking a Waymo as opposed to buying a car. Who knows, what will happen in a few years, So, seeing those things not only is a cool thing to witness, it's not only, a sign of what's to come in society with, growing technology in our lives and, the AI boom and all that stuff. But it also promotes conversations about that with your friends, with people that you love, your family members, your coworkers. It kind of keeps you naturally younger and more informed, There's like a stereotype that, boomers and old people don't know how to use technology. They're unaware of what's going on with newer technology. Some of them don't even know how to use email. Some of them, aren't even aware of, ChatGPT. And I think for the most part, that stereotype is pretty true. And I wonder if it's, true because of where they're living. They're just not as exposed to newer technologies, to newer ideas, living in the suburbs or living in rural areas. Or if it's because of just their mindset, growing older. I think it's obviously a combination, in 40 years, I'm probably going to be the boomer who doesn't know how to use holograms, doesn't know how to use, the metaverse or whatever they come out with, But I think living in a city, because you're exposed to these newer ideas, these newer technological advancements, I think it naturally keeps your brain young and keeps your mind young. Another thing is that you're just naturally exposed to more people. So, obviously people are getting a little disconnected with technology these days. So people are a little less open to talk in public. But if you're in a big city in general, I think people are more open to talk because you see more people. And when you see more people, you're more comfortable being around people in general as well. Another point that I wanted to bring up is the time wasted driving, or the time wasted, stuck in traffic. And this is probably a problem that extends to both suburbs and cities, if I'm being frank, because America has a bunch of cities that, in general aren't that walkable, don't have great public transport, and have huge amounts of traffic. But let's say you are in a place that is more walkable, that, does have decent public transport at least, or you're at least, able to not spend as much time in traffic. You will have so much more of your day available to you that you wouldn't have had before. And especially, painting this in the context of percentage of time in your day, a lot of times in Atlanta, I'll spend an hour and a half in traffic a day, and maybe even 2 hours, in traffic a day, just going to work, not even like 10 miles away from where I live. And so the cost is, in the 16 waking hours that I have, 1/8 of that, 12%, is spent in traffic. And I can listen to music, I can listen to podcasts while driving, but I think there's just something about being able to take public transport or walking places that lets your mind relax. It lets you calm down. You don't have to worry about, navigating anywhere. You don't have to worry about, stupid drivers messing up, your day or cutting you off in traffic. You're just at ease more often than not. And even if you're doing the same things, like listening to music or, listening to an audiobook, reading a book, like whatever it is, maybe doing nothing, I think in general it's more relaxing. And it's better for your mental health to not be stuck in a metal box for 5, 10, 15% of your day. Lastly, I want to talk about time spent indoors versus outdoors. People need to stop rotting. And this is something that I've kind of realized as well as I've gotten a little older. This term, like bed rotting or brain rotting, like rotting in bed, rotting does not help you relax. Rotting is basically just doom scrolling on social media, just blasting your brain with reels, TikToks, YouTube videos. Basically, you're on a screen. And rotting doesn't let your brain relax because your brain is really relaxed when it's not being stimulated. And when you're indoors, oftentimes a lot of people like to stimulate themselves, artificially. They want to be on screens. They want to be watching TV. They want to be scrolling on their phone. And I think there's a time and place for that. But I think in general, the less time you spend scrolling, less time you spend on screens, the better. And so when you are indoors, you can make a cognitive effort to not do this as much. But it's just a lot harder to, as opposed to when you're spending time outdoors, Obviously, I want to end this video by saying, I'm not saying my opinions on this won't change, As I, hopefully get married, as I, potentially have children, my priorities in life might change. I might be more focused on, what school system is my kid going to, can I get a decent sized house for my family to live in, that gives my, whether it's my parents, whether it's my children, whether it's my wife, a place to, have a home, to make a, nice living, arrangement. Maybe I prioritize, better, sanitation. Maybe I prioritize other things. But that's basically my thoughts as of now. And that's why I really want to live in a big city, like New York growing up. So if y'all relate, let me know. Thank y'all again for listening, and I'll catch y'all later.